The text came in, and it hit me like a sucker punch. "Don't expect me to take care of you when you're old. I have my own life and family." I stared at the screen, frozen. My thumb hovered above the keyboard. The sting was sharp, but I refused to let it show. I simply typed one word: "Okay." But inside, something had cracked. Something shifted. David, my son, the one I had poured my life into, the one I had given everything for, had just made it crystal clear. I was no longer his priority. I set the phone down slowly, like it was a live grenade about to explode. My heart pounded in my chest, but my face remained impassive, a practiced mask I had perfected over the years. The silence in the room felt suffocating. I should have felt anger, frustration, but all I felt was a quiet resignation. After all these years of loving him unconditionally, I wasn't prepared for this. Not from him. I let the moment pass, my mind trying to process what had just happened. My son, my own flesh and blood, had just confirmed the worst fear I had kept buried for so long. All the years I had spent supporting him, listening to his complaints, offering advice, and giving him financial support when he needed it. Was that all in vain? Was I nothing more than a tool for his convenience? I took a deep breath. This wasn't the time to fall apart. I had work to do. Without hesitation, I picked up the phone again. My fingers dialed the number I knew by heart. My lawyer, Jeffrey. His calm, measured voice had been my lifeline in more than one sticky situation over the years. If anyone could help me turn this situation into something I could control, it was him. It rang once, twice, and then I heard the familiar voice on the other end. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Taylor. How can I help you today?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Hi, Jeffrey. It's Linda. I need to discuss a change to my will." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a brief, knowing chuckle. Jeffrey had been my attorney for years, and he knew me well enough to understand that when I called with urgency, something serious was at stake. "I see," he said. "I'll clear my schedule. Let's talk tomorrow. Same time?" I didn't hesitate. "That works. Thank you." I hung up, a quiet sense of resolve settling over me. It wasn't just about money or property anymore. This was about respect, something I had given freely, but it seemed David wasn't ready to reciprocate. If he wanted to walk away, fine, but he needed to understand that his actions had consequences. The next day, I walked into Jeffrey's office with the weight of my decision resting heavily on my shoulders. I had spent nearly 30 years married to Robert, building a life from nothing. We were never wealthy, but we worked hard. We made sacrifices, and we invested wisely, knowing that someday it would pay off. When Robert passed away unexpectedly, it was devastating. But as I stood there, I realized that I had inherited everything we'd built together, not just the house, but the life we had made. And David. David had always seemed like a good guy. He called me often, visited on holidays, and brought his wife, Jessica, and their 2 children over for Sunday dinners. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back now, I wasn't so sure. I had given him so much. Too much, maybe. And he had never really appreciated it. How could he? If all I had been to him was a safety net, a source of money, it would explain his sudden indifference. It would explain the cold, heartless message. Jeffrey's office was as immaculate as ever. Polished wood floors, a sleek desk, and shelves of legal texts lining the walls. His assistant ushered me into the familiar conference room, where Jeffrey was already sitting with a thick folder open in front of him. He looked up as I entered, giving me a small, knowing smile. "Good to see you, Linda. I'm glad we could arrange this meeting so quickly." I didn't return the smile. Instead, I sat down, straightened my back, and stared directly at him. "I need you to make some changes to my will," I said, my voice steady but firm. "David isn't who I thought he was. I've been too generous with him, and I need to ensure that my estate isn't just going to him. He doesn't deserve it." Jeffrey's eyebrows furrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. Instead, he gestured for me to continue. I want to set up provisions that make it clear my estate is not just a given, I said. If David wants anything, he'll have to earn it. I don't want him to think he can walk away from me when it suits him and still get everything when I'm gone. If he chooses to be indifferent, then fine, but it won't come without consequences. I want the money to go to causes that matter. I want it to work for me, even when I'm no longer here. Jeffrey was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving me. I could tell he was considering the gravity of my request. "Linda, are you sure?" he finally asked. "This is a significant step. Are you prepared for the fallout?" I didn't hesitate. I've spent my life putting others first, always trying to keep the peace, but enough is enough. It's time to put myself at the top of the list for once. If David doesn't respect me now, maybe he will respect the consequences later. I'm done being his safety net. If he wants to keep his inheritance, he'll need to prove he deserves it. And if he doesn't, then it goes to people who will appreciate it. Jeffrey nodded, his expression softening. "I'll draft the changes, Linda, but I want you to understand the full implications. David will not take kindly to this. It might change your relationship with him permanently." I knew that, but I also knew that it was the right decision. And the next few days were a blur of paperwork and decisions. I signed the new will, the provisions that would ensure my estate was divided according to my wishes, protecting my assets and leaving a legacy that reflected my values. I had spent years being the one everyone turned to for help. Now it was time for me to make sure that help would not be taken for granted. When the will was finalized, I felt a sense of finality. The weight on my shoulders, the constant fear that I was being used, was finally gone. But what would David think when he saw it? I didn't waste time. The very next day, I sent him a copy of the updated will. His reaction would be swift. I knew that much. But what would it be? Would he try to call me and apologize? Would he feel guilt or resentment? Or would he simply move on with his life, as though it didn't matter? The waiting was unbearable. I spent the next few days in a haze, unable to focus on anything else. I tried to keep busy with errands, with reading, with anything that would distract me from the inevitable confrontation. Came on the fourth day. The text came through at 3:15 in the afternoon, as I was sipping coffee on the porch, watching the world go by. I knew, deep down, this was coming. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean what I said. I was angry, frustrated. I never meant to hurt you. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time, the words on the phone burning into my mind. But I wasn't going to make it easy for him. He didn't deserve easy. I set my phone down, feeling the weight of the decision settle in my chest. I would talk to him, but on my terms. No more being the one who always forgives, always lets it slide. This time, he needed to understand the weight of his actions. I picked up my phone again, typing a response. "We'll talk when you're ready to respect me as your mother, not just as a bank account." Then I hit send. What happened next? You won't believe it. Stay with me. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that like button if you're hooked on this story. And where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this one goes. 6 months ago, David called me. His voice was tight with stress, a familiar, urgent tone that always set my nerves on edge. "Mom, we need $15,000 for medical bills. Jessica's mom has cancer and insurance won't cover the treatments." I didn't hesitate. When your child comes to you in need, you don't question, not when it's something serious. I wired the money the next day. I never even considered asking questions. After all, it was family. But, as the days passed, something about it didn't sit right. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't the money. I'd given to him countless times before without a second thought. But the urgency in his voice, the way he had painted the picture of Jessica's mother's condition, didn't match the situation I knew. A week later, I decided to ask Jessica about it. She'd been pleasant when she came over for dinner, her usual friendly self, but something felt forced. Her smile didn't reach her eyes the way it used to, so I decided to confront her. "Jessica, how is your mom doing? David told me about the cancer treatments." Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment she seemed genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice faltering. My heart skipped a beat. Something was off. Before I could respond, David appeared at the door, stepping into the kitchen. His face was pale, and his posture was tense. He quickly intervened, smoothing over the awkwardness with practiced ease. "Oh, it's nothing, Mom," he said, his voice tight. "It's just preventive care. Nothing serious. You know how it is with insurance, they won't cover it unless it's life-threatening." But I wasn't buying it. The lie was right there, clear as day. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. David, who I had always trusted, had just lied to my face. Jessica seemed too shocked to even comprehend the situation. I didn't press it further that night. I needed time to process, to figure out what to do next. But in the back of my mind, the alarm bells were ringing louder than ever. Over the following weeks, the lies began to pile up. Little inconsistencies started cropping up everywhere, each one a small red flag I couldn't ignore. David would mention things that didn't align with what I had heard before. He said his job was stressful, but he always seemed to have more than enough time to visit, to sit down for long chats. He'd talk about their financial difficulties, but when I asked about the bills, he'd always change the subject. Then there were the small, offhand comments from Jessica. She'd mentioned that they were planning a big vacation, but then when I asked about it, she claimed it was just a weekend getaway. The inconsistencies didn't stop there. I started noticing them in the way they spoke to each other, in the way they looked at me. The masks were slipping. The hardest part was the realization that I wasn't just being lied to, I was being manipulated. Every time I gave in, every time I handed over more money, I was reinforcing the false narrative they'd built. They weren't just taking advantage of my generosity, they were using it to cover up their own deceit. How far would you go to protect yourself when you've been betrayed by family? It's a question I had to answer for myself, and the answer, I knew, wasn't going to be easy. The trust I had in my own son had been shattered, and the consequences were far-reaching. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The first thing I did was start digging. I pulled out the records from that time, bank statements, wire transfers, everything. I had to know the full extent of the lie. What exactly was David doing with the money I'd given him? What was he hiding? I called Jessica's mother's insurance provider. I asked about the treatments David had mentioned. And just like I suspected, there was no record of cancer treatments, no records of anything close. The insurance company told me they had no such claims. It wasn't just a mistake or a simple misunderstanding. It was a deliberate lie. I felt sick to my stomach as I stared at the records. The truth was now undeniable, and what hurt most was that it wasn't just about the money. It was about trust. It was about being betrayed by someone I had loved and supported without question for so many years. I wasn't going to confront them yet. No, this needed to be done carefully. If I was going to protect myself, I had to play this right. I called Jeffrey again. "I need your help," I told him. "I need to make sure that I'm protected, legally and financially. There's more going on here than I realized, and I won't stand for being taken advantage of anymore." Jeffrey listened quietly as I explained everything. When I was finished, he didn't ask a single question. "I'll help you," he said simply. "We'll take care of this. But you have to be prepared for the fallout. Your son, he won't take this lightly." I didn't care. I couldn't care anymore. If David was going to push me away, I wasn't going to sit around and let him walk all over me. It was time to take control. The next few days were a blur of decisions and consultations. Jeffrey helped me draft a series of legal protections, updates to my will, instructions on how to divide my estate, and provisions that would safeguard me from any future attempts at manipulation. I also started making a list of the things I could no longer ignore. Every instance, every little lie I had brushed aside. Those were the moments I needed to focus on. I had to be meticulous, documenting everything. Then, the final step came. I called David. "David," I said, my voice cold, "I know about the money. I know it wasn't for cancer treatments, and I know that you've been lying to me for months." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his breath quicken, the panic rising in his chest. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "No more lies, David," I said firmly. "This is the last time. I'm not going to be part of your deception anymore. I've already made the necessary arrangements. You don't get to keep taking from me. The next time you ask for money, you better be honest with me about why." There was a long pause, but I didn't wait for him to respond. I ended the call. What happened next? You won't believe it. Stay with me. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that like button if you're hooked on this story. And where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this one goes. I started paying closer attention. Little things that I had dismissed before now seemed impossible to ignore. Jessica would stiffen whenever I mentioned my investments, her eyes darting around as if she couldn't get away fast enough. David, on the other hand, would always steer the conversation toward my future plans, always suggesting I move into assisted living. I was 71 and running 3 miles every morning. What exactly did they think I needed help with? I had never been healthier. My mind was sharp, my body strong, and my independence something I took pride in. But as I watched them, I began to feel something I had never expected from my own flesh and blood: suspicion. Every time I mentioned my plans to travel or any future investments, they would change the subject, almost as if they were trying to redirect me toward something else. It was subtle, but it was there. It was the way David would shift his posture, his gaze lingering just a little too long when I talked about my finances. And Jessica? Well, she would always start texting or checking on the kids the moment the conversation veered in the direction of my future. There was something they weren't telling me. Then came the text that shattered everything. I was sitting in my kitchen, sipping my coffee, the warm steam rising into the air, when my phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from David. I picked up the phone and unlocked it, expecting a casual update or a request for something insignificant. Instead, I saw the words that would haunt me for weeks. "Don't expect me to take care of you when you're old. I have my own life and family." I couldn't believe it. I read it again, then again. No explanation, no reason, just that cold, abrupt message. I sat there staring at the screen, my coffee slowly cooling beside me. The silence in the room was deafening. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to process what I had just read. The betrayal was a slap in the face, sharp and sudden. The walls I had built around my own understanding of my son, my family, came crashing down in an instant. I felt like a fool. All these years, I had been there for him, sacrificing my time, my resources, my energy, believing that the bond we shared was something real. But this message? This was a betrayal of everything I had believed in. It was a direct punch to the gut, an admission that I had been nothing more than an afterthought in his eyes. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing through 1,000 thoughts, trying to find a reason for what David had said. Was this just a moment of anger, a knee-jerk reaction to something I had done or said? Was he just venting his frustrations in a moment of weakness? But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. There was more to it. This wasn't a random outburst. This was calculated. I didn't respond to the text right away. I needed time to process. I had spent my entire life protecting my family, guiding them, teaching them values. Now I had to ask myself, what do I do when the person you trust the most betrays you? I wanted to scream, to confront him immediately. But I knew that would accomplish nothing. I needed to be calm, rational. This wasn't just a blow to my pride. This was about my future, my independence, my hard-earned assets, everything I had worked for. Would you stand your ground or break under pressure? I decided that this was the moment I would stand my ground. I had spent too many years letting my family dictate my decisions, letting their whims and desires control my life. Not anymore. I immediately called Jeffrey, my lawyer, and explained the situation to him. He listened patiently, his calm voice offering me a sense of reassurance that I desperately needed. "Linda," he said when I finished explaining, "you've been generous with your family, but it's clear now that you need to make some changes. You can't continue to be manipulated like this. I'll help you take the necessary steps to protect yourself." It felt like a weight had been lifted. I wasn't alone in this. There were steps I could take. I didn't have to face this alone. And the next few days were a blur of emotions, decisions, and conversations. I didn't speak to David. I couldn't. Every time I tried to call him, my hands would shake, my throat would tighten. I wasn't ready to confront him yet. I needed to gather my thoughts, my strength, and my plans. Meanwhile, I made sure to start putting everything in place. I reached out to a financial advisor and began reviewing my investments, tightening up the management of my assets. I didn't want to leave anything to chance. If David thought he could manipulate me, he was wrong. I also began drafting a new will, one that reflected my new stance. The old will had been too generous, too open-ended. Now, I was making provisions that would ensure I was protected. I wasn't going to be used as a safety net anymore. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much of my own life I had allowed them to control. But not anymore. Days turned into a week, and I still hadn't heard from David. The silence was suffocating, but I wasn't about to break. I had stood my ground, and I wasn't going to back down now. Then, late one evening, the phone rang. It was David. I felt my heart skip a beat, the tension rising in my chest. I had been preparing for this moment, but nothing could prepare me for how I would feel when I finally heard his voice again. "Mom," he said, his voice hesitant, almost trembling. "Can we talk?" I didn't say anything at first. I was trying to gauge his sincerity. Was he coming to apologize? Or was this just another round of manipulation? "I got your message," he continued, his words shaky. "I'm sorry for what I said. I didn't mean it. It was just a moment of frustration. I was stressed out and I don't know why I said that." I took a deep breath, steadying myself before I spoke. "David, I've been there for you your entire life. I've given you everything I had, my time, my resources, my love, and this is how you repay me? With lies and betrayal?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear him swallowing. He was trying to come up with the right words, but there was nothing he could say that would undo the damage. "I'm not angry," I said, my voice steady. "I'm disappointed. You've shown me who you really are, and I'm not going to pretend I don't see it anymore." The silence stretched between us, heavy and thick. But I wasn't done yet. "You'll have to earn back my trust, David, but don't expect me to just forget what you've done. You've made your choice, and now I'm making mine." With that, I hung up. What happened next? You won't believe it. Stay with me. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that like button if you're hooked on this story. And where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this one goes. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the coffee getting cold. My fingers lingered above my phone as I stared at the screen. What could I do? Beg him? Apologize? No. That wasn't me. I wasn't the type to grovel, not when it came to something this serious. For years, I had given David everything: love, support, time, and resources. He had been my world, and I thought I had been a good mother. But that text, those cold, heartless words, had shattered everything. How could he think I was just another burden, something to be discarded when it was no longer convenient? No, I couldn't let that stand. I took a deep breath. It's time for a change. I typed one word. Okay. I read the word on the screen again, almost as if hoping it would change. But no, there was no magic in the word. There was no softening of the blow. It was simple, direct, acknowledging what he had said without any emotion or explanation. I didn't need to justify myself anymore. I hit send. Then I called my lawyer, Thomas. The last time I had called him had been for routine updates on my investments, nothing personal. This time was different. This time it was about more than just legalities, it was about protecting myself. "Thomas, I need to revise my will," I said when he answered, his voice warm but professional as always. "Of course, Margaret. Is everything all right?" he asked, concern slipping into his tone. "Everything is perfectly clear now," I told him. I felt a shift, a sense of clarity that I hadn't felt in years. My vision was no longer clouded by loyalty or sentiment. For the first time in a long while, I was seeing my life through clear eyes. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, as if Thomas were weighing his next words carefully. "I understand. I'll prepare the necessary documents. Let me know when you're ready to move forward." "Thank you," I said, my voice steady, even though I could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on me. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, taking a moment to collect myself. My heart was still racing, but for the first time in days, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. How far are you willing to go when someone you love crosses a line? I had spent my life prioritizing my family, David, Jessica, and the kids. Every decision I made had been for them, even when it meant sacrificing my own needs and desires. But this was different. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about me. It was about standing up for myself no matter how difficult or painful it might be. I couldn't ignore the feeling gnawing at me, the realization that I had been taken for granted, that I had allowed myself to be used, to be a convenience, instead of being treated with the respect I deserved. That text from David, that final betrayal, was the wake-up call I needed. The next morning, I spent hours reviewing my finances, making sure everything was in order. I pulled out my investment documents, my insurance policies, and my savings accounts. It was time to secure my future, to make sure that no one, not David, not Jessica, could manipulate me again. It wasn't just about the money, it was about my independence, about reclaiming control over the life I had built. As the days went by, I started making changes, small yet significant ones. I stopped picking up David's calls immediately. I let them ring through, taking the time to decide whether or not I was ready to engage. It wasn't that I didn't care about him anymore. It was that I needed space. I needed to heal. Then came the moment I had been dreading. David showed up at my door one evening, his face a mixture of guilt and defiance. I could tell he had been rehearsing what he was going to say. He had that look in his eyes, the one that made it clear he knew he had crossed a line, but wasn't sure how to make it right. "Mom," he said, his voice soft, "I've been thinking about what I said, and I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. It's just, things have been really hard lately, and I was frustrated." I crossed my arms and looked at him, trying to gauge if there was any sincerity in his voice. But I had learned not to trust words alone. Not after everything that had happened. "You don't get to say that, David," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I gave you everything. I supported you through every challenge, every mistake. And this is how you repay me? With lies and betrayal?" He opened his mouth as if to respond, but I cut him off. "You don't get to manipulate me anymore. I've already made my decision. You'll have to earn back my trust, but don't expect me to forget what you've done." His face paled, and I could see the shock in his eyes. He hadn't expected this reaction. He probably thought I would fall into the same old pattern, forgiving him without question. But this time, I wasn't going to play that game. "I can't believe you're doing this, Mom," he whispered, his voice shaking with emotion. "I thought you'd always be there for me." "I am here for you," I said, my gaze unwavering. "But I'm here for me now, too. I've spent my entire life being there for you, David. It's time you start being there for me." I watched as the realization slowly dawned on him. This wasn't just a minor conflict, it was a turning point. He couldn't just walk back into my life and expect everything to go back to normal. The balance of power had shifted, and it wasn't something he was prepared for. Without another word, I turned and walked back into the house, leaving him standing on the porch. What happened next? You won't believe it. Stay tuned to see how this story unfolds. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that like button if you're hooked on this story. And where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this one goes. The next day, David barged in, red-faced and furious. His hands were clenched at his sides, and I could see the vein in his neck throbbing with anger. "What the hell did you do?" he yelled, his voice cracking with frustration. I didn't flinch. I calmly set my coffee down on the table, my eyes never leaving his. "Lower your voice. The neighbors can hear you." That only seemed to make him angrier. He took a step forward, his eyes wild with fury. "I found out you transferred everything. Where did it go?" His words came out in a sharp, accusing tone, like I had done something criminal. I leaned back in my chair, completely composed, feeling a quiet sense of power for the first time in weeks. "Into a trust. It's none of your business," I said firmly, locking eyes with him. The silence between us was heavy, a tension that neither of us could deny. David stood there for a long moment, as if expecting me to break, to apologize or justify my actions. But I wasn't going to. Not anymore. The decision had been made. I wasn't his pawn to manipulate anymore. He didn't like that. His face twisted into an expression of disbelief, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "This is outrageous," he spat, his fists tightening. "You can't just do this. You're my mother. You owe me." I shook my head slowly. "No, David, I don't owe you anything. Not anymore." David turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him with such force that the walls rattled. But I stayed where I was, unmoved, my mind clear. David and Jessica didn't stop there. They tried everything: flowers, calls, surprise visits. They even played the guilt card, telling me how hurt they were, how they felt abandoned. It didn't work. I wasn't moved by their efforts. I wasn't swayed by their tearful apologies or their desperate pleas. Every time they came around, I simply repeated the same message: "I've made my decision, and it's final." They would leave, fuming, but I didn't care. Their games no longer had the same hold over me. I wasn't the naive, easily manipulated woman I had been a few months ago. I had seen the truth for what it was, and I couldn't unsee it. I had my lawyer on speed dial. I made sure all my legal documents were in order, my trust fully protected, and my assets secure. There would be no more threats, no more manipulation. The groundwork had been laid, and I wasn't backing down. It was freeing, in a way, to finally be in control. But the emotional toll wasn't as easy to ignore. Every day the silence between us grew louder, and with it, a sense of finality that stung. But this was the price of self-respect. Ever been manipulated by someone you trusted? Watch how I fought back, and how it changed everything. The manipulation didn't stop. It seemed that David and Jessica would stop at nothing to regain control over what I had worked so hard to build. Their next move was to try and have me declared mentally incompetent. The idea was simple. If they could prove I was unfit to manage my own affairs, they could reverse my trust and take everything back. But I wasn't afraid. I knew they would try something desperate. They underestimated me. I agreed to a psychiatric evaluation, knowing full well that my mind was sharp, my decisions clear, and my will stronger than ever. When the results came in, I passed with flying colors. Their attempt to tarnish my reputation and character backfired spectacularly. In court, David's lawyer tried to paint me as a frail, emotional widow, someone easily manipulated, someone who didn't know what she was doing. They tried to convince the judge that I was out of touch, an elderly woman who had been duped into making decisions that didn't align with her best interests. But the forensic psychiatrist they brought in to testify was not fooled. She dissected their case, point by point, exposing the lies and the manipulation. She laid bare the truth. I was more than capable of managing my own affairs, and every decision I made regarding my trust had been deliberate, thoughtful, and in line with my values. The judge ruled in my favor, and the trust was upheld. What would you do if someone tried to take control of your life? Find out how I stayed in control. What would you do if your own child tried to take advantage of you? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'm dying to hear your perspective. Even after the court ruling, David and Jessica didn't give up. They tried again, this time threatening legal action, claiming I was being unreasonable and selfish. They thought that if they wore me down enough, I would cave, that I would give them what they wanted. But I was prepared. I had everything documented. Every conversation, every visit, every text message. I had legal backups and expert testimony to protect me. I wasn't going to let them twist the narrative again. When the truth finally came out, it wasn't pretty for them. Their once glamorous lifestyle, built on debt and deceit, crumbled before their eyes. The house they had been living in, the expensive car they had been driving, the image they had worked so hard to maintain, everything came crashing down. They lost it all. Their manipulation and greed had caught up with them, and they had no one to blame but themselves. Now, life felt different. It wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming my life, my independence, and my peace of mind. I was no longer a victim in their narrative. I had become the author of my own story. I also became more connected to my community than ever before. I found strength in the people around me, those who had been there for me, those who supported my decision to stand up for myself. My relationships were more genuine now. I had boundaries that I respected, and I made sure others respected them too. When my grandchildren turned 18, they each received a letter from me, explaining the whole story. It wasn't about the inheritance or the trust. It was about teaching them the importance of self-respect, boundaries, and standing up for yourself. I wanted them to know that love doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity, that you don't owe anyone anything just because of blood ties. It was a lesson I had learned the hard way, but one I was determined to pass on. What would you do if someone you loved saw you as nothing more than a paycheck? Would you have the courage to walk away? Thanks for watching my story. If it resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. You deserve respect, always.